Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the American Northwest. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the winter of 1883, 27 men ventured into the dense forests of northern Montana's Bitterroot Range. The logging and fur trade were booming businesses, drawing ambitious men to the untamed wilderness with promises of fortune. Their encampment, established near what is now known as Blackwater Creek, was meant to serve as a base for a season of trapping and hunting. Records show they were well-equipped, well-supplied, and experienced in frontier survival. The leader of the expedition, Jeremiah Holcomb, had organized similar ventures for over 15 years without incident. Yet, despite these favorable circumstances, only 9 men would ever emerge from those woods. The disappearance of 18 men represents one of the most perplexing mass vanishings in American frontier history. No bodies were ever recovered. No conclusive explanation was ever provided. The 9 survivors refused to speak of what occurred during those 3 months isolated in the wilderness. What follows is a reconstruction of events based on fragments of journals, local newspaper accounts, territorial records, and the few testimonies that emerged years later, when the survivors believed no one was listening. The official explanation, as recorded in the Montana Territorial Register, dated April 17, 1883, attributed the losses to harsh winter conditions and possible hostilities with native tribes. Yet weather records from that winter show unusually mild conditions, and the local Salish people had maintained peaceful relations with trappers for decades. Something else happened in those woods, something the survivors worked deliberately to conceal. This is the story of the Blackwater Creek hunting camp and the terrible secret that has remained buried for nearly a century. Mill Creek, Montana Territory was a modest settlement in 1882, consisting of little more than a general store, a sawmill that gave the town its name, 2 saloons, and a scattering of wooden structures that served as homes and businesses. Situated in a valley with mountains rising in every direction, it was a place where men came to seek their fortunes in lumber, furs, and occasionally gold. The settlement's population fluctuated with the seasons, swelling in spring and summer when the passes were clear, thinning as winter approached. But there were those who saw opportunity in the harsh Montana winters, when fur-bearing animals grew their thickest coats and commanded the highest prices. Jeremiah Holcomb was one such opportunist. At 53 years of age, he had spent the better part of his life in the territories. Originally from Pennsylvania, he had moved westward as a young man, working as a surveyor before establishing himself as an organizer of hunting and trapping expeditions. By 1882, his reputation in Mill Creek and surrounding settlements was well established. He was known as a meticulous planner, a strict disciplinarian, and a man who brought his teams back alive. The Mill Creek Gazette from November 1882 contains an advertisement placed by Holcomb, seeking experienced men for winter expedition, 3 months' work, equal shares of profits, previous wilderness experience required. Inquire at Wilson's General Store. According to store ledgers preserved in the Territorial Archives, 26 men were eventually selected from among the applicants. They ranged in age from 22 to 48. Most had previous experience with Holcomb or came recommended by his associates. A few were newcomers to the territory but brought valuable skills or resources to the venture. The expedition was to be a commercial enterprise, primarily focused on trapping fur-bearing animals and scouting potential logging sites for a spring cutting cruise. December 3, 1882. The expedition departed from Mill Creek, 27 men in total, riding in 8 wagons loaded with supplies to last through winter and into spring. Territorial records list their names: Jeremiah Holcomb, Augustus Reed, Samuel Perkins, Thomas Fletcher, William Norton, Benjamin Lewis, Charles Winston, Jacob Miller, Isaac Thompson, Frank Wilson, Daniel Roberts, Joseph Davis, Henry Adams, George Stewart, Edward Collins, Michael Williams, Robert Taylor, John Anderson, James Martin, David Brown, Richard Evans, Christopher Hughes, Paul Mitchell, Peter Schmidt, Frederick Cooper, Howard Griffin, and Eli Watson. 9 would return: Holcomb, Reed, Perkins, Fletcher, Norton, Lewis, Winston, Miller, and Thompson. The rest vanished without a trace. The journey to their chosen hunting grounds took 11 days. They followed established trails, crossing the Clark Fork River before turning northwest into less charted territory. The terrain grew increasingly difficult: dense forests of pine and fir, steep ridges, narrow valleys cut by swift-flowing streams. According to Holcomb's journal, they encountered no other humans after the 4th day, though they did come across abandoned trapper cabins and the occasional prospect hole where some hopeful miner had tested the ground for gold. On December 14th, they reached their destination, a relatively flat area in a valley where 3 streams converged to form what Holcomb named Blackwater Creek, due to the dark coloration of the water stained by the tannins from surrounding vegetation. The site was well chosen from a practical standpoint: ample water, natural shelter from the prevailing winds, plentiful game trails visible in the light snow cover, and enough flat ground to establish a substantial camp. They immediately set to work constructing their winter quarters. The men were divided into teams, some cutting timber, others clearing ground, still others beginning the construction of the first cabins. Holcomb's journal from December 15th notes, "Work progresses satisfactorily. All men contribute according to their abilities. Weather holds fair. First cabin nearly complete by sundown. Expect to have all men under proper shelter within the week if conditions remain favorable." By December 21st, the camp was largely complete. 7 cabins arranged in a rough circle, with a larger central structure serving as mess hall and meeting place. A rudimentary stockade of sharpened logs surrounded the perimeter, not for defense against human attackers, but to keep large predators at bay and to prevent the pack animals from wandering. Standard procedure for wilderness encampments of that era. Holcomb established routines immediately. Men were assigned to hunting parties, trapping lines, camp maintenance, and guard duty on a rotating basis. His journal from this period reveals the methodical mind that had earned him his reputation for successful expeditions. Detailed inventories of supplies, records of daily hunting yields, maps of established trap lines radiating outward from the camp, and careful notation of weather conditions. The first 5 weeks passed without significant incident. The men settled into their routines. Trap lines were checked daily. Hunting parties brought in deer, elk, and the occasional moose to supplement their provisions. Pelts began to accumulate: beaver, marten, fox, and the particularly valuable river otter that inhabited the streams. Holcomb's journal entries from this period are mundane, detailing hunting successes, weather conditions, and minor disputes among the men. On January 2, 1883, he wrote, "Norton and Schmidt engaged in heated words over a card game, separated them before matters escalated. Otherwise, spirits remain high, trapping lines yielding satisfactory results. Expect first shipment of pelts to be ready by month's end." No indication of the horror that would soon envelop the camp. The men were not completely isolated during this period. According to Holcomb's journal, a system had been established whereby accumulated pelts would be transported to the nearest trading post, a 5-day journey by horseback, where they would be exchanged for additional supplies, and any necessary communications with Mill Creek could be conducted. The first such journey was scheduled for late January, with Wilson and Evans designated as couriers. They never made that journey. January 24, 1883 marks the first anomaly in the record. Holcomb's journal entry for this date contains a curious note. Reed reports unusual findings along the northern ridge. Claims to have discovered abandoned camp. No sign of occupants. Peculiar markings on trees surrounding site. Will investigate tomorrow, if weather permits. The next day's entry is brief. Weather did not permit investigation. Reed agitated. Claims to have heard voices in the forest during night watch. Likely overtired. Have assigned him to camp duties for 3 days' rest. 3 days later, Holcomb records, Reed continues to speak of voices in the forest. Now claims they call his name. Have examined him for fever or other ailments. Appears physically sound, but mentally distressed. other men beginning to avoid his company. January 26 brings the first indication that Reed's experiences might not be isolated delusions. Stewart and Brown report unusual sounds while checking northern trapline, describe as whispering that follows but never comes close enough to understand. Both men of sound character and not given to fanciful notions, have instructed all men to travel in groups of 3 rather than pairs until situation clarified. The following day's entry is ominous. Schmidt failed to return from trapline. Cooper and Mitchell sent to search. No sign by nightfall. Will continue search at first light. January 28th. Cooper and Mitchell located Schmidt's final trapline. Traps undisturbed. No sign of Schmidt. Unusual tracks in snow, possibly bear, though pattern inconsistent with any bear sign I've encountered. Men increasingly uneasy. January 29th. Cooper missing as of morning count. Mitchell claims they separated briefly while searching for Schmidt. When he called out, Cooper did not respond. Another search party formed, no success. Camp now down 3 men. Have ordered all trapping activities to be conducted in pairs. No man leaves camp alone. By February 1st, Holcomb's writing betrays growing concern. Men report sounds from forest during night, describe as voices without words, likely wind through rock formations creating unusual acoustics. Nevertheless, have doubled night watch rotation. A pattern was emerging. Men were vanishing 1 or 2 at a time, without struggle, without alarm, often when momentarily separated from their companions. The psychological effect on the remaining men was profound. Holcomb's journal documents increasing tension, arguments, sleeplessness, and what he terms nervous disorders among the expedition members. February 30th. Mitchell located approximately 1 mile from camp, confused and disoriented, claims to have been led astray by familiar voices. Mequel. Medical examination reveals no physical injuries, but extreme exhaustion. He speaks of the door in the cave, but becomes agitated when questioned further. Have sedated him with whiskey and laudanum. The situation deteriorated rapidly after this point. Holcomb's entries become sporadic and increasingly disturbed in tone. From February 5th, Mitchell found dead this morning, no apparent cause, body cold, features frozen in expression of extreme terror. Men insist on burial outside camp perimeter despite frozen ground. 4 hours to dig adequate grave. Roberts led prayer service, morale at lowest point. That same day, Watson, Hughes, and Taylor failed to return from hunting expedition. Griffin and Anderson volunteered for search party, reluctantly approved despite growing darkness. Neither they nor the hunting party returned by midnight. Camp now down 8 men. Remaining men insist on gathering in Central Hall rather than dispersing to individual cabins. Have agreed to this arrangement for sake of morale. A significant gap exists in the journal between February 5th and February 18. When entries resume, they are radically altered in character and content. Holcomb's normally precise handwriting appears shaky, hurried. He no longer records dates consistently, sometimes marking entries only as day or night. One undated entry simply reads, "They watch from between the trees. They are not what they appear to be." Another, "7 more gone. They went for water. The creek is only 200 yards from camp. We heard no struggle, no cries for help. They simply vanished between one moment and the next. Those remaining refused to speak of it, as if silence might protect us." The final entry, presumed to be from late February, "We leave at first light, the 9 of us who remain. We burn everything we cannot carry. We tell ourselves we will reach Mill Creek in 10 days if we maintain steady pace. We tell ourselves we will be safe in daylight. We tell ourselves many things." What exactly transpired during those missing 2 weeks in February? The journal provides no answers. Later testimonies from the survivors are contradictory and often incoherent. The only other contemporary document from this period is a fragment of what appears to be a personal diary, presumed to belong to Benjamin Lewis, recovered among his effects when the survivors returned to Mill Creek. The fragment contains just 3 entries, undated. The singing comes from beyond the ridge now. Mitchell says it's coming from the cave, but there is no cave. Mitchell is not well. None of us are well. Reed says they're coming closer, says they wear our missing friends' faces like masks, says he can see what's behind the masks when they blink. He won't tell us what he sees. Holcomb ordered us not to speak of it, says speaking gives it power. But silence hasn't protected us either. We are 19 now. Tomorrow there will be fewer. The 9 survivors emerged from the forest on March 12, 1883, according to the Mill Creek Gazette. They arrived separately, not as a group. First came Reed and Miller, stumbling into town shortly after dawn. Winston and Thompson arrived at midday. The others straggled in before nightfall, with Holcomb being the last, arriving as darkness fell. Their physical condition was poor, but not critical. They showed signs of exposure, malnutrition, and exhaustion consistent with a difficult winter journey. But they bore no serious injuries, no frostbite, no wounds that might explain the loss of their companions. Their psychological state, however, was profoundly disturbed. The Mill Creek Gazette of March 14, 1883 reports, "The men appear greatly altered from when they departed some 3 months past. They start at sudden sounds. They avoid direct gaze. They speak little, and when pressed for details of their expedition, provide accounts so varied as to suggest deliberate obfuscation or mental confusion resulting from their ordeal. Their accounts of what happened varied so dramatically that authorities quickly became suspicious. Reed claimed they had been separated during a blizzard. Miller insisted there had been no blizzard, but rather an attack by an unidentified mountain tribe. Winston and Thompson refused to speak at all. The others provided contradictory versions of events, each inconsistent with known facts and with each other's testimonies. What they agreed upon was that 18 men had perished. How, why, and where remained contested. No coherent explanation emerged. The territorial governor, concerned about possible foul play, dispatched Sheriff James Blackwood, notably the Oss, grandfather of Theodore Blackwood, who would later investigate the incident, to interview the survivors and determine whether criminal charges were warranted. Sheriff Blackwood's report, preserved in territorial records, concludes, "While inconsistencies in their accounts raise suspicions, there is no physical evidence of wrongdoing. The men appear traumatized rather than guilty. I recommend medical attention rather than legal action." Doctors who examined the survivors noted unusual symptoms. Dr. Martin Whitaker's medical report states, subjects exhibit extreme aversion to darkness, insist on lamps remaining lit throughout night, react with disproportionate terror to certain sounds, particularly wind in trees or distant animal calls. Several report identical nightmare of being called into forest by familiar voices. Recommend continued observation. The territorial governor dispatched a recovery expedition on March 20th, guided by Lewis and Fletcher. According to the official report filed upon their return, they were unable to locate the hunting camp. Both guides appeared disoriented in terrain they should have known well. After 10 days of fruitless searching, the expedition returned empty-handed. This failure fueled speculation. The Mill Creek Gazette of April 2nd asks, were our guides deliberately misleading the recovery team? If so, what horrors are they attempting to conceal? If not, what phenomenon could so disorient men who had successfully navigated the same terrain just weeks earlier? A second, larger expedition in June 1883 finally located the remains of the camp. They found the burned remnants of cabins consistent with Holcomb's journal entry about burning everything before departure. They found no human remains, no personal effects, no evidence of violence or struggle. The official report notes, site appears to have been abandoned in haste, but without disorder. No indication of attack or natural disaster. The fate of the missing men remains undetermined. This expedition made another discovery not mentioned in the official report, but recorded in the private journal of Alexander Reynolds, the team's cartographer. Reynolds writes, "Located unusual cave formation approximately 1 mile north of campsite. Entrance partially concealed by fallen timber. Interior walls covered with markings unlike any I have encountered. Not Indian pictographs, not minor symbols, not natural formations. Geometric patterns that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. Expedition leader ordered cave sealed with dynamite after 2 team members reported hearing voices calling from its depths. Detonation successful. Entrance completely collapsed. The 9 survivors scattered after providing their testimonies. Records indicate most left Montana Territory entirely. Augustus Reed relocated to Oregon. Samuel Perkins moved to California. The others similarly dispersed across the country, maintaining no contact with each other according to available records. Jeremiah Holcomb remained in Mill Creek briefly before departing for Seattle in late 1883. His journal, which he had carried out of the forest, was donated to the Territorial Archives under the condition it remained sealed for 75 years after his death. It was finally opened in 1960, Holcomb having passed away in 1885, reportedly by his own hand. The mystery might have ended there, relegated to local folklore, had it not been for Theodore Blackwood, a graduate student at the University of Washington, who encountered Holcomb's journal while researching frontier settlements for his doctoral thesis in 1962. Blackwood became obsessed with the Blackwater Creek incident. His research notes, preserved in university archives, document a methodical investigation spanning nearly a year. He tracked down county records, newspaper archives, church registries, and personal correspondence related to the survivors and their descendants. Most significantly, he conducted interviews with the still-living relatives of the 9 men who had emerged from the forest in 1883. These interviews reveal disturbing patterns. Martha Reed, granddaughter of Augustus Reed, reported that her grandfather never slept in darkness and maintained loaded rifles at every door and window until his death in 1884, just a year after his return. William Perkins, grandson of Samuel Perkins, recounted family stories of his grandfather's episodes, periods where he would insist that friends long dead were watching him from the corner of the room, wearing faces that didn't fit right. Blackwood's research also revealed that of the 9 survivors, 7 died within 2 years of their return, most by suicide or under questionable circumstances. Augustus Reed shot himself in October 1884. Samuel Perkins drowned in the Sacramento River in January 1885, though witnesses reported he was a strong swimmer. Thomas Fletcher was found hanging in his barn in March 1884, with what the coroner described as an expression of extraordinary terror on his face. Only Jacob Miller and Isaac Thompson lived to old age, both becoming recluses in their later years. Miller died of natural causes in 1927 at the age of 76. Thompson outlived them all, passing away in 1931 at 82. In Thompson's personal papers discovered after his death by his son Edward Thompson, Blackwood found a sealed envelope marked, "To be burned unread upon my death." Edward Thompson had retained the envelope but honored his father's wish not to read its contents. He provided it unopened to Blackwood, who persuaded him that the historical value of its contents justified breaking this promise. Inside was a detailed account of what Thompson claimed had occurred at Blackwater Creek. The document, dated January 3, 1930, begins, "I am the last living witness to what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883. As death approaches, I find the need to record the truth, though I have spent my life concealing it. Let this account serve as both confession and warning." According to Thompson, the trouble began not with the disappearance of Schmidt, as Holcomb's journal suggests, but several days earlier. Thompson writes, "It was Reed who found the cave, Not an abandoned camp, as Holcomb recorded. A cave, its entrance half hidden by fallen timber. Inside, Reed discovered peculiar markings carved into the stone walls. Not Indian signs, not miners' markings. Something older. Something none of us recognized. Reed brought others to see his discovery. Thompson continues. 7 of us entered the cave with Reed. Holcomb refused to go, saying he had trapping lines to check. Inside, we found the markings extended deep into the mountain. Fletcher, who had some schooling, said they resembled no language he knew, but had a mathematical precision to them. Roberts noticed they seemed to change when viewed from different angles, as if shifting under our gaze. Thompson describes how they discovered a chamber deep within the cave system. The walls opened into a space larger than our mess hall. At its center stood what Roberts called a door frame with no door. A perfect rectangle of stone standing unsupported on the cave floor. Beyond it, only the far wall of the chamber was visible. Yet something about that frame made us uneasy. The air around it seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer rocks. What happened next, according to Thompson, defies rational explanation. Schmidt was closest to the frame. He reached toward it, not touching, merely pointing. Said he felt a cold draft coming through. Then he stepped forward, as if to pass around the frame. Instead, he passed through it. One moment visible, the next gone. No sound, no flash of light. Simply gone, as if he'd never been. Panic ensued. The men fled the cave, returning to camp. They told Holcomb and the others what they'd witnessed. Most dismissed it as a prank or hysteria. Cooper and Mitchell, however, insisted on returning to investigate, convinced Schmidt was playing an elaborate joke. They never returned. Thompson's account grows increasingly disturbing from this point. He describes how, over the following weeks, men continued to vanish, not only from the cave, which they'd sealed shut with felled timber, but from the camp itself. They were taken in moments of solitude. A man would step behind a cabin for privacy or walk to the edge of the clearing to relieve himself and never return. No tracks leading away. No signs of struggle. More terrifying were the voices. Thompson writes, "We began to hear them after the first week. Familiar voices calling from the forest. Schmidt's voice. Cooper's voice. Each man who had vanished calling to those who remained, asking for help, begging to be let back into camp. We maintained strict discipline. No one responded. No one ventured out after dark. But each night the voices drew closer. Each night they sounded less human." Most disturbing of all was Thompson's description of what they began to see at the forest's edge. They looked like our missing companions, standing just beyond the firelight, but wrong somehow. Their proportions subtly altered, their movements too fluid or too rigid, their faces expressionless, even when calling out in apparent distress, and their eyes. When the firelight caught their eyes, they reflected back not red as an animal's might, but a deep, impenetrable black. By February, according to Thompson, the survivors had split into factions. One group, led by Winston, advocated abandoning the camp immediately. Another, under Roberts, insisted they must find and recover their missing companions. Holcomb maintained they should wait for better weather before attempting the journey back to civilization. The breaking point came when Roberts and his faction ventured into the forest one morning, armed and determined to locate the missing men. They were 15 when they left camp, Thompson writes. By nightfall, none had returned. We heard their screams throughout the afternoon, distant at first, then closer, then abruptly silenced. When darkness fell, 17 figures stood at the forest's edge. Our missing companions, Roberts among them, all standing motionless, watching the camp, all wearing the same empty expression. The 9 who ultimately survived made their escape the following morning. They left in haste, taking minimal supplies, abandoning much of their equipment. Thompson's account becomes fragmented here, describing a desperate 10-day journey through the forest. "We did not travel as a group," he writes. "That was our salvation. We scattered, each man making his own way, using the sun and stars to maintain a southeastern course toward Mill Creek. By day, the forest was merely a forest. By night, Thompson never explicitly states what pursued them by night. He only writes, "They are not gone. They are never gone. They found a way through, and now they walk among us." They look like men, but they are not men. And they are spreading. The document concludes with a cryptic warning. If you encounter a man who does not cast a shadow at noon, who does not blink in strong wind, who speaks your name as if learning how the word tastes, run. Do not look back. Do not respond when he calls after you. What wears his skin is not a man at all. Theodore Blackwood became convinced Thompson's account, while perhaps distorted by trauma and time, contained elements of truth. His research notes show increasing preoccupation with verifying specific details. He consulted geological surveys to confirm the presence of cave systems in the area. He interviewed elderly residents of the region about local folklore predating the Blackwater Creek incident. He compiled a list of unsolved disappearances in the Bitterroot Range dating back to the earliest European explorations. Most significantly, Blackwood attempted to locate descendants of the 18 men who vanished. He found none. No death certificates, no estate records, no mentions in family Bibles or church registries. It was as if they had never existed beyond their names on Holcomb's expedition roster. Blackwood's faculty advisor, Professor Lawrence Merritt, became concerned about his students' increasingly erratic behavior. In a letter to the department chair dated May 12, 1963, Merritt writes, Blackwood has abandoned all pretense of academic objectivity. He speaks of the Blackwater incident as if it were occurring in the present rather than 80 years past. He reports unusual sounds outside his apartment at night. He has taken to carrying a sidearm, claiming it contains silver bullets, though I suspect this is merely a bizarre joke. I recommend a leave of absence. Before any action could be taken, Blackwood departed Seattle for Montana. His last known communication was a postcard to Merritt, dated June 7, 1963. Leaving tomorrow for the Bitterroot Range. Have coordinates for the camp location. Will verify Thompson's account directly. If I do not return by July 1st, notify Sheriff's Department in Missoula. University records indicate Blackwood departed Seattle on June 8, 1963. He never returned. A search party found his abandoned campsite 3 weeks later. His research materials, including Thompson's account, were recovered intact. Blackwood himself was never located. The University of Washington's Department of History officially closed Blackwood's case in September 1963, listing him as missing presumed deceased due to wilderness accident. His research was archived, largely forgotten until 1968, when Professor Marion Leach discovered it while organizing departmental records. Leach, intrigued by Blackwood's findings, conducted her own investigation. She never ventured into the field, instead focusing on historical records and interviews with locals in the Bitterroot region. Her research uncovered a disturbing pattern. The area surrounding Blackwater Creek had been the site of multiple disappearances stretching back to the earliest European explorations. French trappers in the 1820s referred to it as la forêt qui prend, the forest that takes. Native legends spoke of a thin place where the boundary between worlds could be crossed under certain conditions. Most significantly, Leach discovered that the 9 survivors of the 1883 incident were not the only ones to emerge from the forest that season. Between March and October 1883, 11 strangers appeared in settlements throughout Montana Territory, men with no history in the region, men who could not or would not account for their origins, men who, according to local records, exhibited peculiar behaviors and mannerisms. Leach compiled a list of these individuals from territorial records, newspaper accounts, and church registries. Among them, John Smith, likely an assumed name, who appeared in Helena in April 1883. Described